Good day, I welcome everyone who has joined us. I'm Olga Tamanova. I'm happy to welcome you in the Media Center Ukraine today. This is the 945th day of the full-scale invasion of Russian aggressor against our land and the 11th year of the war. Today we will be speaking about the very important and sensitive topic for all of us. We will have the presentation of the completion of the project to improve the support system for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. The name of this project is Let's Stand Together. So we will be speaking about its conclusions. A couple of words about the project. Let's Stand Together project is implemented by the Ukrainian Women's Fund in the partnership with Strada Ukraine NGO, and also with the support and also the participation of the Women's Lawyers Association of Ukraine, JurFem, with the support of the Vice Prime Minister and also the Commissioner on Gender Policy, and it is funded by the European Union. So today we will be speaking about its conclusions. Undoubtedly, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, it seems to me such crimes have gained new scale for us, new, even unexpected scale, I would say. It's the very really sensitive topic. So before getting ready to this conference, I looked at the figures to understand what situation is registered by the Prosecutor's General Office as of now. By the presentation of the Office of the Prosecutor General's Office, as of August 24, there have been 314 cases of sexual violence connected with the conflict, 211 women, 13 men, 15 of them are undermined, 14 are girls and 1 boy. We have such a situation, and undoubtedly now this is an important system of support where we need to develop it and to work on that, where we involve as many actors as possible at the different levels, both state and non-state. I'd like to give the floor to our speaker. Well, first of all, let me introduce all of the speakers today. We are joined by Nataliia Karbovska, Director of Strategic Development at the Ukrainian Women's Fund. We have Yaryna Voloshyn, Head of Communications at the Association of Women Lawyers of Ukraine, JurFem. We have Serhii Hubin, journalist and head of the National Press Club Ukrainian Perspective. We are joined online by Kateryna Cherepakha, president of the NGO Strada Ukraine, and we are also awaiting soon we'll be joined by Kateryna Levchenko, Governmental Commissioner for Gender Policy. So, Nataliia, the floor is yours. Let us talk about the main outcomes of this project and what was the objective. We've already got to know about partners, so maybe you could expand about the geography and the important senses of this project. Thank you so much. Good day, dear colleagues. You know, today we are presenting and speaking about the outcomes, but I remember, in fact, how we started. We started approximately at the same time 2 years ago in 2022. When we had Bucha already, we had Irpin already. We started to get to know about daily, we got to know about the information and new cases of sexual violence connected with war, with conflict related, but then Ukraine lacked the systematic response to such cases. So in fact, this was such a project which emerged as an initiative of NGOs, initiative which we implemented and founded in cooperation with the authorities. We 3 women's NGOs of Ukrainian Women's Fund, the Association of Women Lawyers, JurFem, NGO Strada Ukraine, in partnership with the Office of the Vice Prime Minister on European and Euro-Atlantic integration, in partnership with the Governmental Commissioner for Gender Policy. We had such an initiative and we were supported by the Office of the European Union in Ukraine. You know, according to my experience, this was one of the unique cases when the international organization, our donor, was really flexible approaching the topic and work with us. We quickly developed our initiative and in fact we started the work. During these 2 years just yesterday, by the way, we were talking to my colleagues what the outcomes are. I think that definitely the outcomes can be in figures. It can be measured by certain data, the indicators. The outcomes are measured by the methodological materials and the information materials which we developed. They were multiple, so I think that my colleagues will be speaking about that. We had just several figures. You were asking about the regions. We were working in 14 regions. We selected the regions which, as of that moment, were the most affected by war. Those were the regions which used to be under occupation, the regions which had many IDPs, because obviously among such people, such women and men, potentially there can be people who were affected by sexual violence which is conflict related. So 14 regions took part in the project, and speaking about the partners which were involved, I can't help mentioning about the NGOs and the authorities out of the 14 regions which also joined this initiative. I would like to speak separately about the coalition of 1325, because in each of those regions, in the coalition, we were created during the implementation of the project. Speaking about the figures, our project had three main components. The educational one, because again we understood that we lacked then at least the information, knowledge and expertise, methodologies of the people who face with the cases of conflict-related sexual violence. And this component was dealt by Strada. They developed the curricula, the courses, which are now institutionalized. And I'm sure Kateryna will tell about that in more details. And also, we understand that the topic of conflict-related sexual violence is comprehensive. It needs participation of different experts. That is why Strada has developed such a multidisciplinary educational course, which we, the Ukrainian Women's Fund, have conducted the training for the trainers. In each of the regions we have trainers, and as of today we trained more than 1,800 people, different experts from NGOs, social workers, medical workers, representatives of the security and defense sector. Those are the people who are at the front line in the communities and regions. They are working with the people affected and working so that they could get high-quality services. And what's also important, that those cases should be known and widely known. Those cases should have appropriate response. Our following component, we name it localization. This is the work at the local level. We are really actively working with our partners, NGOs in the regions. 23 grants for NGOs were provided with the overall sum of more than 12 million hryvnia. This is the money not only for the support of NGOs, this is the money for the support of the government to accomplish the National Actions Plan 1325, because sexual violence, which is conflict-related, is one of the issues and spheres of the National Actions Plan 1325. One more component which we implemented in the project is the component which we formally name our policy. In fact, Yaryna, I guess, will tell about that in more details. Let me tell a couple of words only. We started with the training for the legal community, but we understood that one training is not enough, because in Ukraine at the moment we lacked the policies, we lacked the legislative framework, and my colleagues from JurFem started to do that together with the government. They were working on that within the project, and they go on working on that now. That is just in a nutshell as for the outcomes in the figures and indicators. To conclude, I'd like to say that one of the most important outcomes is what we can be proud of, that during these 2 years We were one of the first, in fact, in Ukraine, one of the first projects which started to work in the topic of conflict-related sexual violence, and we managed to help the beginning of the creation of the system at the national level and the regions level. Definitely we go on with this work now, and we're really happy that what we once founded has become developed and is developing further on. So I thank all of us and our partners for cooperation, for the partnership, that we used to be a very friendly team. Yesterday we also talked that we are not just saying this is the end. We had the concluding event of the measure. Sometimes you say that we put a full stop, but we don't even have any full stops. We go on with this work because it's important. Thank you so much, Nataliia. I understand that this project maybe wouldn't never take place without the support of the European Union. So we have the video or speech of Kateryna Maternova, the ambassador of the European Union. Let's watch it.
Дорогі друзі, let me start by reaffirming the European Union's unwavering commitment to ending sexual and gender-based violence worldwide in all of its forms, whether in times of peace or war. Conflict-related sexual violence is a war crime. It is a devastating violation of human dignity. It leaves deep physical and emotional scars, used as a cruel tool of war to break individuals and entire communities. Tragically, Ukraine is facing this horrific reality. And there is more and more evidence that Russian forces have committed sexual violence against civilians and prisoners of war, against women, men, and even children. All of them deserve support, healing, and most importantly, justice without further traumatization. But addressing this challenge during an ongoing war is no easy task. It requires all of us, government, civil society, donors, and experts, to stand together in solidarity. The European Union is proud to support Ukraine through the Resilient Together project. This initiative, driven by close collaboration between the government and the civil society, ensures survivors receive the care and support they need, with a strong focus on a survivor-centered approach. I applaud Ukraine's commitment to include women's organizations and other civil society in decision-making processes, which is crucial for achieving real change. The European Union is also helping Ukraine hold war criminals accountable, particularly for war crimes related to sexual violence. Through the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, alongside the United Kingdom and the United States, we support the Office of the Prosecutor General in investigating and prosecuting these horrific crimes. We are also cooperating with relevant UN bodies and agencies to support Ukraine in implementing the government's action plan to address conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine. Finally, I would like to express my appreciation for the tireless work and dedication of Commissioner Levchenko and the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian Women's Fund, Strada, JurFem, and the many other civil society organizations that took part in the project's many activities across the country. This project has made an important contribution to improving Ukraine's ability to tackle the huge challenges posed by conflict-related sexual violence. The road ahead is tough, but let me assure you, the European Union will stand by Ukraine as we continue this critical fight, and that we will remain resilient together. Slava Ukraini!
Glory to the heroes. Kateryna, the question then goes to you. Undoubtedly, we understand that the challenges which our state faces needs involvement of everybody, both state and non-state sector. And today we can see this unity, but we understand the payments for the affected. This is what should be done and where the leadership is taken by the state. So the floor is yours. Let us look at the state level. How much we managed to develop, and we go on developing this help and assistance system, please. Thank you. Good day, dear colleagues. The project, which in fact is reporting today about the work accomplished, was rather important for the government, for the society, for the regions, because it gave rather rapid responses against the challenges which we faced after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. However, it is such important to emphasize and to understand that Russia and the Russian military have committed sexual violence even before the full-scale invasion. And even in 2019 in Ukraine, we got the network of women affected by CRSV, which was supported by the Ukrainian Women's Fund within this project as well. So violence, sexual violence, is not what appeared suddenly in 2022. That's important, and we need to repeat about that. And it was done by the Ukrainian Women's Fund together with the government at different events. We are also using this term CRSV, conflict-related sexual violence. However, we understand that we are at war, that this violence which is committed by the aggressor, this is not just the war, this is the war of aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine. So please avoid such phrases like war in Ukraine, Ukrainian conflict, Ukrainian war, Ukrainian crisis, because then there is an impression that all of that was done just by us. In fact, we have the external armed aggression which led to such crimes like sexual violence. The state and NGOs have been working together, and just yesterday, during the final conference of the project, the Committee of the Parliament of Ukraine on Human Rights, Deoccupation and Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine, the National Minorities and International Relations, at its meeting has considered the law of Ukraine on the status of persons affected by sexual violence connected with armed aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine, and also in preliminary reparations, and recommended this law draft to be considered in the second reading, to adopt it in the second reading and all together. This is a very important work, which is really connected with the project Let's Stand Together. Yaryna is nodding because JurFem was working directly in the working group. The governmental commissioner staff was also represented since the very beginning. The Global Fund and other funds. The Ministry of Social Policy was involved. The Office of Vice Prime Minister on European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Now she's the Minister of Justice, Olga Stefanishina. And this is the outcome of the work. This is the outcome of our interaction and collaboration. Because, in fact, the state was represented, both executive and legislative branches of power. The initiator of the law draft, Marina Barbina, was also joined by a big number of MPs. If we hadn't had such cooperation, if we hadn't had international expertise, which was also supported by the project and involved with the help of the project through the Global Fund of those who lived through sexual violence and survived it, and the part which was getting ready to the first reading was written by a big working group, which was in the educational tour of the Global Fund in Geneva. You know, I would really like our parliament to support this law draft, because this is the issue of the status, this is the issue of preliminary preparations, because we went on with that. This topic was not raised in the project itself, but now the Global Fund, the government, the staff, the Office of the Vice Prime Minister, the Ministry of Social Justice, the National Social Service of Ukraine, and also the Governmental Commissioner on Human Rights are working now to provide intermediate reparations for such a group of victims of armed aggression, like victims of CRSV. As of yesterday, 409 citizens submitted their applications and approximately 350 got the help. That is so important. An important part of the project, which is being implemented together with the government as well, was the information campaign. I understand that Serhii will talk about that more, but I can't help saying that it's really the interaction. And when we present the book, Ukraine is Not Silent, you will see what's the wide circle of actors which has become part of this book. From the victims to the Vice Prime Minister, the ministers, the ambassadors, and NGOs. That is why the policy of the government is constructed according to the principle of interaction, and we are really grateful to our international partners for the support which is provided for Ukraine through the NGOs and the structures of the United Nations. The work is conducted closely together with the Office of the Special Representative of the UN on Countering Sexual Violence in Conflicts, Ms. Patton, and also within the policy is the framework work of cooperation which has been signed by her and Olga Stefanishina in May 2022. So if we speak about, well, there will be lots of words said about other components of the project and the policy, but dear colleagues, you will always hear that all of that took place in the interaction and cooperation. This principle of cooperation has become a dominating one, and I think that it's so important. And the second important principle is the involvement of victims in the implementation of this policy. Today, I, as the head of the interinstitutional working group on countering CRSV, of sexual violence connected with armed aggression of Russia against Ukraine and provision of help for the affected, with all of the partners and all the organizations, I try to communicate so that in each of the processes we could involve the victims themselves. Those are strong people who lived through violence, but who are ready to speak out, not to be silent. The name of the book, Ukraine is Not Silent, are the words of Lyudmila Huseinova and Irina Dovgany. We will not be silent. We just rephrased it because their words, their statement, are the weapon against Russia. And this weapon is as efficient as the weapon, the real military equipment and armament. So we thank you, Nataliia, Yaryna, Kateryna, and other colleagues that what you have done, what you are doing, and you know that the support which can be in this work, in the achievement of certain objectives, in the professional outcomes, has always been and will be from the government. Thank you. Thank you, Yaryna. Now the floor is yours. The team of JurFem has working on one of the practical parts of this program. Could you share your outcome? I'm thinking, what should I start with, not to repeat. But in fact, sometimes, well, the project is ongoing for 2 years, since October 2022, and sometimes it seems to me that October 22 was really long ago, not just 2 years ago, because this experience, these knowledge and expertise, which we gained to pile up and gain during this project seems to be the development of several generations. And partially it is like that, because within the project we had to collect the information which already exists, to collect certain practices so that the victims of CRSV in Ukraine did not live through the same treatment, the same experience which they had which the CRSV victims had in different conflicts in different corners of the world during different periods. Because the experience of Global Survivors Fund and of many other organizations showed that since the moment when the active phase of armed conflict started, till the moment when people got help and support, got some adequate attitude, and when the state systems were constructed, dozens of years, decades may passed. In the contexts of many conflicts which took place in the 90s and the beginning of 2000, these systems are still not constructed fully. And of course in 2022 and even now we'd like Ukraine to have a different way, and we even can speak about that. I yesterday mentioned during our final conference that now we are not speaking about the ideas, how maybe it could have been constructed, but we're speaking about practical steps which have already been taken, and the project Let's Stand Together is a huge component of this interaction which Kateryna mentioned about. Speaking about our investment and contribution, the components and the work which JurFem was working directly on, we were involved in the development of the educational materials. We've developed the remote course, which is accessible at our educational platform now, and we also conducted several trainings according to it in the regions. But our target audience, first and foremost, are the lawyers, the legal community, because this is the community which has been involved in the work with the law enforcement sector first and foremost, and has been involved from all of the sides, both like attorneys and people who work in the police and in the prosecutor's offices. These are the subjects which the victims of CRSV meet, and their attitude and treatment, because of this sensitive communication, through understanding of their needs, through the understanding that if the prosecutor's office has never been the authority which referred you to get a different kind of help, in this case, the Prosecutor General's office had to become such a authority, and those are the approaches where which are victim-centered. They were in the focuses of the educational developments which we prepared, and also we were trying to create the multidisciplinary groups, because this principle has already showed its efficiency. When we gather at the same training team from the regions, the ones who are working in the social sphere and the ones who are working in the police, the NGOs, the efficiency and this, in fact, efficiency is incredibly important. And also we were working on the law drafts, in particular our participation and help in the development of the above-mentioned of the law draft. A year and a half ago, I would say in my previous life, in April 2023, we organized the visit to Geneva to Global Survivors Fund. And as it seems to me, and as it is shown by the outcomes of the project, the consequence was not only the developed law draft by the expanded working group, which we hope will get successfully through the second reading in the Parliament as well, but also deepening of our common understanding on how we'd like to see this help and system of help. Of course, the discussions are going on, but all of them are directed how to improve the situation, how to make the system even more victim-centered, how to create the situation where the people who lived through CRSV because of the Russian armed aggression wouldn't have to wait for justice for decades, and were deprived of all of the obstacles which unfortunately are still expecting for them, connected with insensitive attitude, because the system is more centered to some extent on the registration, documenting of the outcomes, not for support. provision. I think that all of those approaches are changing already, and the law draft, when it is adopted in the second reading, I really believe in that, it will become a kind of an additional intermediate outcome and indicator that we are not just speaking about that, but creating certain systems, and the state is working so that the support system could be created and implemented. During this visit in Geneva, we could see the participants who were the structures which were directly responsible for the development of the state policies and NGOs, and also, for instance, the representatives of the law enforcement bloc, though it may seem at the first sight that they directly would never deal with the payment of reparations. But still, we need to remember that reparations is not about money compensation. Those are different types of satisfaction, acknowledgement, and justice restoration. This is also one of the forms of reparations. Thus, that is so important that it could be one of the platforms where they had the opportunity to take this interaction, which Kateryna mentioned, and to make it in order. It seems to me that those connections are still working within our platform and other platforms, because it is so important to have these contacts, to stay in touch. What's also important for us, that we managed to involve in this visit the representatives of the Semi-Ukraine organization, because sometimes we are already living according to this principle for a long time, but sometimes we tend to forget that we need a constant reminder that involvement of people who lived through CRSV, the community, which they are united into the development of all of the policies, is incredibly important, because not a single system could be efficient if it did not get verified by the people who were directly living through this experience. That is why this year we had additional consultations before the first reading as of this law draft. We also involved the team of Marina Bartina, which was dealing with this topic in the parliament. She's coordinating this topic among her colleagues who have become co-authors of the law draft. And again, we involved and invited Semi-Ukraine. This year, you know, we could see the new leap of very important and really relevant amendments, because it seemed that only a year passed, but our understanding how the system should look really expanded. Our common understanding did. That is why, of course, we are happy and we thank the project. We thank the Ukrainian Women's Fund, the colleagues from La Strada, and the Governmental Commissioner and the European Union, that such opportunities for the creation of such platforms for the development of efficient policies existed. Now we need to work with that. We need to go on communicating about that, in fact, because these are the topics which you wouldn't like to read about during your pastime. These are the topics which need effort to make the wider audience aware about that. But we need to do that, because we remember that among wider audience there are people who lived through CRSV, who maybe even don't identify themselves that it was the war crime, that it was the international crime. And maybe through all of our common simultaneous efforts, we'll be able to find and to make people aware about the opportunity to get help to those who haven't got this help so far. Thank you, Rina. Now, Serhii, Kateryna has already announced that the world will soon see your developments. Could you please tell about that? Let me tell instantly that this is not only personal. Kateryna is sitting here. This is the mini creative collective. We were working a lot. We were one as a whole. And with our signatures, we have this book, Ukraine is not silent.
Пишуть, ніж говорять. Але сьогодні я маю говорити, хоча, як ви бачите,
I wrote something not to forget, because when time passes by, you look back and you think, there was so much important taking place during these times. We shouldn't forget about that. That's why I wrote it down. When I was told that CRSV topic is not the topic for pastime, it's true. This is the topic for really deep spiritual work. Believe me, this is the topic is intellectual one. What I mean is that we need to spend lots of efforts and perceive this topic as it is. For after we understand it, we can help as much as we can to those who lived through this hell. I will try to speak about that. And another reference I'd like to make now. The media component within the project Let's Stand Together was really powerful. It consisted of two parts. Those were the journalist interviews, and then according to these interviews, which we combined together and created this book of interviews, the book which we are speaking about, Let's Stand Together, which is almost published. Since the very beginning, all of us who took part in this project had the overall common understanding of the importance of information help and support of countering CRSV and help the people affected and victims, those who lived through this grief. I mean the journalists are already doing that. They are changing the opinion of the society in the attitude and treatment to the problematics of CRSV and the people who were affected by it. Finally, we all together are creating this policy of Ukraine so that we could have the understanding of this grief, compassion which we express to those people, and to have the overall understanding that they totally cannot be blamed for what has taken place with them, so that we could support them. And finally, the people affected and the victims wouldn't blame themselves what has happened to them, because such cases unfortunately still take place, and such cases are multiple. Our task is to support the people so that we could have the understanding. As it was mentioned, let me quote Lyudmila Husseinova from the NGO Sama Ukraine, who said, "It is not my shame. It should be the shame of those Russian occupiers who are committing this sexual violence, and let them live with this shame throughout their lives. That's what's important, to change, to shift those emphasis, and to understand that we need to help implementation, this empathy policy in Ukraine." You know, when Kateryna met with us for the first time and said, "You see, we need to prepare 20 journalist interviews," honestly speaking, I sat and thought, God, could we cope with that? Not that it could be too much, but whether these materials could be repetitive, by facts, by ideas and thoughts. We should avoid that, because each material should have been separate, original and unique, and should bear its own idea, so that the people could understand what we wanted to speak about. But after we started to delve deeper into this topic, we couldn't just stop, because we've seen so many issues which need to be solved. And when we came to the planned indicators, Kateryna came to us and said, "Listen, let us add 2 more materials," and we did. Then Kateryna said, "Let's add 3 more." And finally we came to the indicator of 25 materials. That's it so far, because we had the plan of publishing the book. The dates were already appointed when we need to prepare it. Still yesterday, as Nataliia mentioned about our final conference, about the work and the efficiency of the work of this project, we were there with Serhii Hubin and were listening to the reporters, and we understood that the topic of CRSV is so multifaceted, it is so high scale and so deep, that the challenges are becoming various, they're becoming diverse. This topic has to be followed upon, highlighted, and we need to take it to the people and tell how this problem has to be coped with. As far as you understand, we involved in the work, in the communication, a huge number of experts. Those were the governmental officials, for instance, the Vice Prime Minister Olga Stefanishyna, and Ms. Kateryna was here and she gave an interview. Nataliia gave the interview, Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs Kateryna Voloshyn, then Deputy Minister of Justice Irina Mudra, Uliana Tokareva, Deputy of Minister of Social Policy, Social Service, Vasil Lutsiev, then the head of National Police, Ivan Vyhovsky. We also had Serhii Hubin, the permanent representative of Ukraine in the United Nations. So it is a very powerful team. So many experts of international level, on the UN in particular, of the Global Fund of the Survivors, and others. So we can go on with this list. We came to the approximately 40 experts who we cooperated with. Do you understand? They are really busy people. But this is a very important point. A very important point, let me emphasize, because no one denied the necessity of the meeting. Sometimes we had to postpone the meeting because people were in the business trips, sometimes in Ukraine, sometimes abroad. All of that was done with understanding, but nobody refused to take from the meeting. All of them took place, and such responsibility and understanding of the importance of this topic is obvious, and it was felt in all of the levels. Moreover, when we met, well, we had the previous deals about the meetings, and we coordinated the questions, the positions, how it should take place. Mostly we were asked, how long will this meeting take place? And knowing how busy those people were, our experts were, we said about 30 to 40 minutes. They said, okay, very nice, but when we sat down to communicate, believe me, in this case they say that it's easier to start the conversation than to finalize it. So if we spoke for at least an hour, it was nothing. We communicated up to an hour and a half to 2 hours. And as journalists, we provoked with our questions, and we made these conversations longer. No, our interlocutors wanted to share these information and their ideas, because they themselves provoked such long conversation. So I had this feeling of the involvement of these people to whatever is happening around them. They were not indifferent, and I hope they are still like that, and they try to help the people affected by CRSV as much as possible. We've prepared those 25 interviews, and in each of the interviews, which we sent to the media, not only of the national level, but the regional level as well, for the free reprinting, we said, dear colleagues, look, there is a good material of the journalists, the interview with certain people, such problematics. Whoever would like, please list it at your websites, and you can use our materials as well. We did not expect for such a response that as the country is at war, we are not living in the peaceful time, and we had that much of response from the media. Such number of media posted our materials. It's so important because through those materials we reached the people, and we told what problematics exists, how we can use this or that help by state, by NGOs, donors organizations, and so on. So we've shaped a kind of a powerful journalist team, and it is also in particular about the regions which used to be under occupation. As far as you know, Kyiv, Chernihiv regions, partially Sumy, Kharkiv regions, Donetsk, Luhansk ones, Kherson regions. This is what I can list instantly. And the rest of Ukraine, including the western regions, including central regions, were similarly expressing their interest to these kind of materials. So a huge gratitude goes to our colleagues who are working in the national and regional media, who supported our attempts to make people aware about such information. You know, we were using the capacity of internet as much as we could, and this is what we focused our efforts on. Because thanks to the internet opportunities, and this is the media as well, the websites, Levchenko and others, with those materials through internet, we could get acquainted, and we could get acquainted the people who were living in Ukraine, in the governmentally controlled areas. But at the occupied territories, in case if they have internet access, that is so important as well. Because finally we were telling not only how to help people who were affected by CRSV, but also the people who could be victims, could become victims. And we told how we should avoid this issue, how to behave, how to avoid these provoking points, so that this grief would never take place with them. Finally, a very important moment, you know, at the NGO Strada, there are two hotlines, national hotlines, and the department director within which these hotlines are working, Yaryna, we took an interview and I asked her, Alyona, the people who found out themselves to be abroad, they're staying there and they're facing certain issues. For instance, some people don't know Polish but stay in Poland, in Germany, in France, in Italy, where our people found themselves. How can they get information, where to get help and support, and so on? And she told that in case of a necessity, they can send the people to the partners organizations which are working abroad, so that our people could get there. And in case of anything, they could tell about the affected people to the partnership organizations, so they could get the proper counseling. The main assignment, and I'd like to focus your attention on that, first of all for us, was to give you the information that our country in 2022, because of the full-scale aggression, became in a very complicated situation. But we still stand, and our government, our state, were capable to respond to all of that, these sexual violence and the rest, and to create a really efficient and high-scale system of countering sexual violence, which is conflict-related, and to provide help to the people who were affected by CRSV. We told how this system was organically intertwined with the resources and capacities of our financial donors, international donors, NGOs, and this was a powerful combination of efforts. As of today, it gives really powerful outcomes. Thank you so much. So to conclude, let me say, you know, a very important point. This book, that's why we created it. This material can be alive for about a week, but the book will stay for a longer time. So we considered that when we developed this ideology of the preparation of this book, that then it should be presented at the international platforms, because it will be printed not only in Ukrainian but in English as well. And we understood that among our Western partners who are providing us assistance to solve the issues of CRSV, and yesterday we heard this idea at the conference, it's so important to take this book and the information about CRSV in Ukraine and to make it accessible to the residents of the countries of global south, who take kind of a neutral position of attitude towards Russia, or some of them are even support them in these aggressive intentions. It's important to make them aware that Russia and Russians are just ambassadors of the Middle Ages. They stayed in these times. And they came to us with their kind of culture, their vision, how everything should take place to the people who are living already in the 21st century. That is why we will never understand them, and they will never understand us. And only this collective solidarity will give us the opportunity to overcome this Russian aggression in different reflections, in particular in CRSV. Thank you. Thank you, Serhii. We also are in touch with Kateryna. Kateryna, I hope you stayed with us, you heard us, and you saw us. Kateryna, undoubtedly your team is working with the victims for so many years. I don't know, this is just a huge number of applications weekly and daily, and you have this bulk of information. So how much were you involved in these projects? Could you share your developments as well, please? Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to join online to this event, really, as the issue of conflict-related sexual violence is not new for Ukraine, and Kateryna and Nataliia mentioned that above. Such cases, including the ones came to our organizations since 2014, 2015. However, as my colleagues have mentioned, during this period, Ukraine did not have a systematic and comprehensive approach to the response against the cases of conflict-related sexual violence and the comprehensive system of help and support for the victims. So since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine, and since the beginning of this project, one of the important components in our activity, including the involvement of our organization, Strada, was the use and the studies of the international experience of the countries which have already lived through the similar experience. And besides getting to know how it worked or it did not, how it was developed in other countries, and we had the organization of training visits to Croatia, to Bosnia. The colleagues from Ukrainian Women's Fund were also involved in the organization of such visits. One of the points which we're trying to take into account, and we're directly asking about those organizations from the above-mentioned countries, not only what they did and how they did it, but also it was important for us to understand what they would do differently, understanding the challenges. Because more than 30 years passed since these years, and one of the answers which always was heard from the representatives of the NGOs of these countries and of the state institutions as well, that it was important not to wait for so long, not 10, 20 or 30 years, to begin developing the system, the comprehensive system, to provide assistance to the victims, to provide reparations, to create procedures, policies and legislative acts which would regulate that. And one more lesson learned, which was mentioned by them, is an importance to provide access to justice. And really, those important conclusions which were taken from these training tours, and the training tours, by the way, were organized for two groups, two teams, by the outcome of which we went on with this activity. They were multidisciplinary teams. The experience which was used for the training course development for the representatives and the trainers who implemented the trainings for multidisciplinary teams at the local level. And also it was experience which was used and taken into account for the development of the training course for the judges. This activity was implemented together with the National School of Judges of Ukraine. This is also the example of interaction which Kateryna mentioned about, because this interaction between the state institutions, NGOs, with the colleagues from different institutions, both from Ukraine and abroad, is so important. So as the outcome, Within the activity of this component where La Strada was involved in, we've prepared 2 training courses, a training course for the representatives of multidisciplinary teams, and here the trainers were the participants, the representatives and experts from NGOs from those 14 pilot regions which were covered by the project. And further on, they went through the training for the trainers, and then they implemented trainings at the local level for the multidisciplinary teams at the level of communities. Those are the teams which combine the representatives of social services, law enforcement authorities, medical workers, educational workers, representatives of media. So these are the comprehensive trainings. And again, colleagues mentioned about that, the opportunity to combine different subjects and involvement of different subjects, especially at the local level, the level of the community, is incredibly important. Because in fact, for us within this project, one of the important tasks was the cooperation, involvement, readiness, and understanding of the importance and severity of the issue of CRSV, the importance to respond. And involvement wouldn't be just at the national level. It shouldn't be just at the global level, because really we have a very active and powerful support of all of the key subjects involved, of the Office of Governmental Commissioner for Gender Policy and Vice Prime Minister and Social Policy, National Police, the Ministry of Interior, the Office of Prosecutor General, and other affiliated institutions. And also it was so important so that this interaction, cooperation, the comprehensive approach with the victim-centered approach could be implemented not formally, not nominally, but to understand the importance to take into account all of those aspects in the local level, where those communities exist, in the communities which have victims, in the communities which hosted or will host the victims who maybe were forced to move from different territories. So in fact, this is a very important component. Another component which I mentioned about is cooperation with the National School of Judges of Ukraine and the development of the training course for the judges on this topic. And again, it is so important to have the component that this training course, which has been developed, and the training for the trainers, which further on was implemented, really helped the institutionalization of this course. This course is included into the program of courses of the National School of Judges, and it will be taught at the systematic level. It is so important because we understand that even after the end of the project, this course will go on living. It will go on, it will be taught further on, and there are judges who can become trainers who will be able to implement this course as well. So it tells us about institutionalization and stability of this activity. One more important point I'd like to mention, Yaryna mentioned about that as well, that in fact this project started 2 years ago, but I have the feeling that so much has changed and the whole life has passed. We're always telling everyone who we meet with colleagues and trainers that in fact this information, these materials on topic on conflict-related sexual violence and response, some approaches and practices, is a very dynamic process. Kateryna has already mentioned today about certain new steps about this law draft. In fact, the situation in Ukraine is really dynamically developing, and it's very important to take into account and follow the developments which we could have tested and understand how efficient they are working. It is, in fact, the permanent element of moving forward and improvement of the response. It is also important here, and I'd like to mention in the end of the day, that in spite of, and speaking about the component where La Strada has been involved, in spite of kind of separate groups, multidisciplinary teams and judges, within our activity, we are foreseeing and have implemented the opportunity of meeting and exchanging the approaches, the information, the views. Because let me repeat, the problem of CRSV is incredibly complicated. It's comprehensive, and it's also needs the comprehensiveness of the system and approaches. It is important to take into account the development of materials, the preparation of such materials, of the representatives of the organizations which represent or have been created by the victims of this crime. So this is the process, as Nataliia said in the beginning, is ongoing. This is not just the end, it is ongoing. And as already it was showed by the practice of other countries, even 30 years after the end of the war and the conflict, this problem is still relevant. And we also understand that this is the situation and the issues which will need close attention and comprehensive approach during many years after our victory. It is so important, and it is also important not to delay it, not to postpone it, but to make everything timely and to take into account the experience which we have in Ukraine. Because unfortunately, I have to say, unfortunately, Ukraine has lots of its experience, which it shares with other countries as for the response, the integrity of the systems, and the interaction of different subjects in the response against CRSV. Thank you. Thank you, Kateryna. Thank you that you joined our conversation. Dear colleagues, if you've got any comments or questions, let me know. And I've got a short question to Kateryna and Nataliia. What's next? Thank you. Next, let me say 3 points, because there is lots of what's expecting for us next. First of all, we are going on implementing the framework program of cooperation on countering and fight against CRSV and implementation plan for its execution. It is comprehensive and integrated. It concerns all of the subjects. Let me just say that the interinstitutional working group on its implementation includes more than 170 participants from 74 organizations, NGOs, international state ones. Secondly, an important task is to go on providing help to those who lived through the violence according to the best identification of such cases, which is possible again through the help and support system. We know that the person who got help is ready to speak out, to communicate with the journalists, with the international organizations, the ones who identify that, the law enforcement authorities, and rehabilitation programs are so important for that, including rehabilitation programs for the affected men and their families, for the male victims. Because so far, as for the intermediate reparations, more men than women submitted their applications, so more compensations were paid to men than women. The country is changing the understanding that this is just the violence against women. And the third point, the most important thing, what we need to do together, Russia has to bear responsibility, and our work can also help that. That is, in our hands, Russia has to be in the blacklist of the countries according to the procedure of the reports of the Secretary General of the United Nations on countering conflict-related sexual violence. And there is the list, the blacklist of countries which cannot use their contingent to conduct peacekeeping operations in any corner of the world. Today, Russia is part of these peacekeeping, peace building, I'm saying ironic, of these processes. So for that we need advocacy, we need understanding how we can work with the international partners at the bilateral level, and our society has to also be conscious, the Ukrainian society, that we need to do that and support such efforts. Thank you. Yes, as a follow-up to Kateryna's words, I'd like to say that in our project Let's Stand Together, rather often we've used the word, and we are using the word, the voice, to be somebody's voice. It is so important. We are going on strengthening the voices of the victims. We are going on supporting the organization of Sama Ukraine and other organizations which unite the victims. We go on supporting the women's and feminist organizations and other human rights organizations which are also becoming the voices of the victims. We mentioned today, my colleagues mentioned about the importance of the information and communications. In our project, we have also developed the information materials which will be widely spread together with our partners in the regions at the national level so that more people could get to know about that, so that more voices could join our common voice. Thank you so much for this conversation. Undoubtedly, I'd like to express my gratitude to all of the participants and your teams for the work you accomplish in this important affair. I hope that these common efforts, united efforts of all of the stakeholders in this sphere will lead to main outcomes. First of all, that whoever needs support will get support, and secondly, that the aggressor country and all of the perpetrators will to bear responsibility. Thank you. Thank our armed forces of Ukraine that we can get together and speak about important topics. We go on working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine.